Greetings. Trends in food production is an international comparison. And basically, the purpose of this PowerPoint is to talk about how you compare things, both in terms of absolute numbers and in terms of the numbers per capita. So the lesson could be used in a world geography class. It definitely be used in a world history class. It could also fit into an economics class. And a cultural affairs class, because we're going to be looking at trends over time that lead up to the present. So, once upon a time, there were a bunch of teachers thinking about their state social studies standards, and one of them said we should use, interpret, and create graphs representing population characteristics, natural features. And the Common Core came along and said we should analyze the relationship between dependent and independent variables using graphs. And the writing standard said we should support claims with clear reasons and relevant evidence, of which a graph would be. So we've got one of these activities that could be used in a variety of classes, in a variety of settings, to meet a variety of different standards. To meet every one of them, though, and others like them, you have to be able to figure out what a graph is actually trying to show. And if you're talking about food production, you probably should start by what do you mean by food production? Because some people raise food wheat for bread on huge fields, and other people raise rice for on small fields with a lot of hand labor. Some food producers raise cattle for meat on huge ranches. Some raise cattle in feedlots and trucks bring grain into them. Some of them raise cattle in order to milk them on small farms in Wisconsin. Some food producers raise sheep on high mountain pastures. Others raise specialty crops like lettuce, or fruits like apples that grow on trees, or vegetables that grow in a greenhouse when it's too cold outside. Some of them even stick pipes into the side of maple trees in order to make syrup for your pancakes that you made out of wheat in the first field there. In short, there's a staggeringly large number of different ways to describe food production. And if you want to compare countries to see where people have enough to eat, you've got to figure out how to add up all these different kinds of production. That leads us to the comparison that we're trying to make about food trends in 3 different world regions. So to make a graph of food production, we're going to use a really simple measure, pounds of food per person. Now, to understand a graph, you've got to start by reading the title very carefully. If you're just talking pounds of food, then obviously places like China and India are going to make a whole lot more than Albania will. This is the world average, and you want to start out here. How would students describe the trend that's shown on this graph? Because you're going to have students that are going to see the overall trend, and you're going to have students that are going to focus on the ups and downs movements, and that's what they're going to see, and they might not even see that the right end is higher. So you want to start out by saying, if you're going to draw a simple line through this graph, what does it look like? And one way to say it is, of course, food production per person has gone up since 1960. During this time period, though, world population more than doubled from 3.4 billion to more than 7 billion now. So food production must have gone up even faster. Why? Because the average person had more to eat in 2010 than they did in 1960. That's an important fact, but that's a world average. It's good news. In 1960, food production per person in China, India, and East Africa was almost exactly the same, just a little bit more than half of the world average, which meant that there were some places, like North America, Europe, and so on, where people were getting a lot more food, so that the world average would be where it was. Now, since 1960, farmers in each one of these regions have doubled their food production. But food production per person has been different in these three regions. So let's put that on a graph. In India, how would you describe what happened in India? And if a student basically says food production per person went up at just about the same as the world average, the lines went up roughly parallel. The average person in India started out in 1960 with about half as much food as the average for the world. And in 2010, they had about half as much. Meanwhile, China has gone from way down at half to higher than the world average. It started about half and ended above, which meant that that's a spectacular achievement. I mean, they've managed to have a population that is much better fed than it was back then. If we add a line for East Africa, how would you describe that trend? And the only fair way to say is food production has doubled, but the production per person has not only not changed much, it might even have gone down a little. That leads us to part 3 of this presentation. How do you explain the differences in food production per person when the amount of food that went up in each of these regions was roughly the same? That is, every region doubled their food production, but the food production per person went up above the average in China, stayed about the same, and went down in East Africa. In your handout packet is a table of data. And the question is very simple. Just hand this out to the students and say which line, 1 to 7, has the information that would be most useful in trying to explain the trend in food production per person. So there's your data table. If you look at line number 1, that basically just describes the result. There's more food now in China than it was in the past. It doesn't explain the difference. It just describes it. Line 2 tells you that people in China are richer and they're able to buy more food. Again, that doesn't explain the trend in production per person. That helps explain why the consumption might be higher. If you go down to the bottom of the list, this actually seems kind of odd. You would think with a lower population density that people would be able to grow more food in Africa than they could in China or India. It certainly doesn't explain why they wind up having less per person. Line 6 is really important information. The number of people in China and India that have a good water supply is much higher than in East Africa, but it's not at all related to food production. And then you've got something like literacy. This is also important, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the amount of food available per person. Like I say, it's just numbers there. And line 3 is related to food production. If you've got more to eat, you're likely to live longer, but it's a consequence. It's a result of having more food. It's not a cause of having more food. So that leaves us family size. That's really the key. That if people have a lot of children, food production per person can go down even if total food production goes up. Let me say that one more time because there's an awful lot of students that don't get it. If you've got more people eating, food production per person can go down even if total food production in that region goes up. That's the kind of deep analysis that is kind of necessary to be a good citizen these days. Talk about crime rates per person, or immigrants per person or whatever. But it's not easy. When you see a table that's got an awful lot of numbers, it can be hard to decide what numbers are useful information and what's just a bunch of numbers. What causes what, what is unrelated, what's important but not in, it's hard to decide what's useful. But situations like this come up in news reports, stock markets, political campaigns, just lots of places. So it's a skill. Learning how to do this is a citizenship skill. It also helps us understand why China is getting richer a whole lot faster than East Africa is at the moment. So the main point, stated one more time, if the production of something, whatever, food, houses, energy, goes up in a country or a state or a town or a family or whatever unit you want to use, but the number of people goes up even faster, then the amount per person goes down. If you have got more kids and the same number of presents, then each kid is going to get fewer presents. Pretty much that's the way it goes. Think about the next time a politician talks about the production of anything: corn, oil, steel, cars, computer chips, college graduates, doctors, missiles, murders, national debt, crime rates, whatever. Now, this lesson could go in an economics class, it could go in a history class, it could go in a US geography class, a world geography class. Printable maps, student activities, a matching quiz can be downloaded from several places in the Giants website. So go to the home, find your grade, nose around, take a look at it.